Boudica is buried under this roundabout. Maybe. Welcome back to this final episode of History on Your Doorstep, the series which introduces you to the extraordinary past hidden in the most ordinary of places. And today, it's the big one. We're finally talking about Boudica. She's haunted the narrative of this series long enough. So I spoke to expert and archaeologist Duncan Mackay to try to understand how much we really know about the warrior queen and her time in Verulamium. So who is Boudica?
Boudica was the wife of a British king called Prasutagus, king of a tribe called the Iceni or the Iceni in modern-day East Anglia. They refer to him as a king. They don't refer to her as a queen, so we assume that she was a sort of queen consort. We know that they had two daughters together and that they were client rulers, as in they ruled with Roman approval after the Roman conquest. When Prasutagus died, the Romans came in to seize the Iceni territory, despite having left half of his kingdom and wealth to his daughters and half to the emperor. The Romans came in to take everything. Boudica stood up to them. She was flogged and her daughters were raped, and the Iceni rose in rebellion. She led a huge rebellion against Roman rule. She destroyed 3 major cities, but eventually the main Roman army fighting in North Wales came down to stamp out the rebellion. The rebellion was stamped out with great savagery and slaughter, and Boudica either died in the battle or shortly afterwards.
Who are our sources and how reliable are they?
We are blessed in the instance of Boudica with our sources. The Roman Britain actually, as a whole, has very few historical sources. Most of them are clustered in the first few decades of the conquest. And with Boudica's rebellion, we actually have 3 different sources by 2 authors, an embarrassment of riches almost. The earliest account is by a historian called Tacitus, who was writing a biography of his father-in-law Agricola, who had served with the Roman army during Boudica's war. That's not a great source. It's mostly composed of made-up speeches, but she does at least get a mention there. But about 20 years later, he writes a huge history called the Annals. And in that, he gives a very, very detailed account of Boudica's rebellion. And that's our main source. And as far as we can tell, matching it against archaeology and what we know of Britain at the time, it's a very reliable, very good source. Then about 100 years after that, we have another author called Cassius Dio, who writes about Boudica in his histories. It's a useful account in 1 or 2 places where he gives us information that Tacitus doesn't, but by and large, it's a much less reliable account.
When you think of Boudica, you probably think of a taller woman with long, curly, gingerish hair. Maybe she's wearing tartan, maybe she's got a golden torque around her neck, but she's definitely wielding a big spear. Dio is the one to give us the visual description of Boudica. He writes, "She was very tall, in appearance most terrifying, in the glance of her eye most fierce, and her voice was harsh. A great mass of the tawniest hair fell to her hips. Around her neck was a large golden necklace. And she wore a tunic of diverse colours, over which a thick mantle was fastened with a brooch. This was her invariable attire. She now grasped a spear to aid her in terrifying all beholders." You can see this is where the iconic image that many of us associate with Boudica comes from, one author writing a century after her death. She is given descriptors usually reserved for a man, a strong voice, large stature, and a man's weapon. Dio even says she possessed greater intelligence than usual for a woman, which was nice of him, wasn't it? Annoyingly, Tacitus never gives us a description of Boudica's appearance, only that before the final battle she mounted into a chariot with her daughters beside her. This is frustrating, as Tacitus's father-in-law, Agricola, played a huge role in the colonization of Britain. And even if he never saw Boudica, it's likely that he had descriptions. Tacitus himself probably never visited Britain, but his descriptions of the geography are consistently accurate, so he must have had some great sources. But wait, doesn't Boudica usually have red hair? Well, yes, but this doesn't actually come from Dio's description. It's thought that Boudica's curly ginger hair might actually come from the Tudor period, where poets wanted to draw a connection between the ancient warrior queen and their very own Queen Elizabeth I. And she's not the only British monarch to have tied themselves to Boudica. This statue, created by Thomas Thornycroft, is known as Boadicea and her daughters. The alternative name Boadicea seems to come from the medieval equivalent of a typo, where a monk, copying Tacitus, misread the Latin. Tacitus himself writes Boudica, but with 2 Cs. The statue was erected in 1902, a year after Queen Victoria's death, but the statue had actually been finished 20 years before. It was probably commissioned after Thornycroft had created an equestrian statue of Victoria for Prince Albert's Great Exhibition in 1851. Some say the figure of Boudica in this statue has a likeness to a young Victoria, and this would make sense as their names may have shared the meaning of victory. Ironically, the chariot Boudica sits in is modelled on a Roman design, with some added scythe wheels for dramatic effect. We can see the influence of Tacitus and Dio's description as she wields a huge spear with her violated daughters at her side. Historians have argued that this statue symbolises the Victorian refashioning of Boudica into an icon of the British Empire. And she certainly looks a bit like Britannia. Stick a helmet on her and I'm sure many people wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But she also sits opposite Parliament here. As a figure of revolution, it seems ironic to try to fashion her as the figurehead of imperialism when she quite literally died fighting an empire. And her face-off with Parliament sort of feels like a threat. But just a few years after this statue was put up, Boudica's image would be invoked again, maybe for a more fitting cause: women's suffrage. The Pankhurst Women's Social and Political Union had silver Boudica brooches in their shops. Christabel Pankhurst was described as a Boudica of politics in 1908. Even the suffragists, the peaceful branch of the suffrage movement, used her as a figurehead on banners and leaflets. These days, most historians consider Boudica a completely different figure from the historical Boudica. And if we want to get to know her instead, we need to get into this rebellion. What leads Boudica to Verulamium?
Boudica's rebellion kicks off in East Anglia, where the Iceni homelands are, and they march immediately for the main Roman city at what is now Colchester, Roman Camulodunum. They destroy that place. A Roman army comes down to try and stop them destroying it, but they also wipe them out as well. So initially it's hugely successful. She then marches on London. Again, London has no defences, no garrison. She overwhelms it, destroys it completely. The Roman army coming from North Wales under a general called Suetonius Paulinus had actually managed to get to London before Boudica, but they declared it indefensible and retreated again. Boudica, having destroyed London, sets her sights then on Verulamium, which is next to modern-day St Albans. She's quite plausibly going up there because Verulamium is a legitimate target in the same way that London and Colchester were. She's also quite plausibly following the Romans as they retreat. But also, if they head north, up Watling Street, just north of Verulamium, the Watling Street crosses something called the Icknield Way, which was an ancient trackway that would lead directly back to her homeland in Norfolk. So it may also have been a route home. She marches to Verulamium, she destroys it, and then we're told by the sources, by Tacitus, that's almost immediately after the fall of Verulamium, Paulinus broke off delay and fought a battle.
Verulamium is not the site of the final battle. Tacitus tells us so. He describes a battlefield, but he doesn't give us a name. Loads of locations have been put forward, mainly along Watling Street, with historians mainly favouring locations in the Midlands. But these locations are usually 50 miles from Verulamium, and it begs the question as to why the Romans didn't end things sooner. Well, in his book, Duncan Mackay presents a different suggestion, one which ends things much closer to Verulamium than any other site. So you believe the final battle location is at Park Street, but what sets us apart from previous contenders for the final battle?
Well, people have looked for this battlefield all over Britain. There have been so many potential candidates put forward, and normally people look for this battlefield by coming across a piece of landscape and saying, this looks like the piece of landscape that Tacitus describes. Tacitus gives us a description of the battlefield. He says there's a valley leading to a Roman position that's backed by woodland, so they can't be outflanked. He doesn't give us much more than that. And of course, the British landscape was full of places that look like that. All of the candidate sites so far put forward, firstly, have produced no artifacts to suggest anything ever took place there. They're often a long way from Verulamium, which we are told was the last place Boudica was at before they fight this battle, which Tacitus suggests is fairly rapidly afterwards. So we have candidate sites in North Wales, in Kent, in Warwickshire, in Wiltshire, in Cambridgeshire, and they're all quite a long way from this final battlefield. As an archaeologist and following the evidence as far as I could, you can follow Boudica's route to Verulamium, both in the archaeology and in the historical sources. There, the trail really goes dead, and I feel that we should be looking for somewhere fairly close to Verulamium. By remarkable coincidence, there is, just to the west of Verulamium, only a mile or two away, a valley leading up from Watling Street. Now, Watling Street is the road Boudica's taking from London to Verulamium. The valley leads directly from Watling Street for a mile up to a hilltop where a Roman army based there would have its a woodland at its back. The woodland is still there. It's ancient woodland at Pray Wood. And remarkably, exactly where you would place the Roman battle line, there's this scatter of early Roman battle artifacts, mostly consisting of lead sling bullets, which were used by the Roman auxilia. So between Pray Wood and the Windridge Farm up on the hilltop, down the valley to the Park Street roundabout, you have this wonderful coincidence of evidence coming together. You have a landscape that we know categorically Boudica was in that landscape. It's recorded historically that she was, and we've got the archaeology to show that she destroyed the town a mile away. We know she's there. The landscape, the topography fits Tacitus very well, and it's a perfect topography of gentle slopes and for the Roman army to maneuver around in the way that Tacitus describes. But crucially, to crown it all, you have that rarest of artifacts in the British landscape, which is a cluster of Roman battle artifacts. That's incredibly rare. And to say that we're looking for the biggest battle ever fought by the Romans in Britain, and you coincidentally have this scatter of battle artifacts at this place that we can put Boudica, I think makes it by far the most compelling candidate at the moment.
So, the legend of Boudica may very well come to an end under this roundabout. Tacitus says she takes poison rather than become a prisoner, and Dio says she dies of some illness, usually interpreted as her succumbing to battle wounds. Boudica has taken on so many forms and stories, we will never truly know the events of 60 AD. But I don't doubt for a second that her legacy will continue to be spoken about, or her image invoked for a cause for decades to come. And isn't it fun to think that this small roundabout, 100 miles from her homeland, played such a defining role in that legacy?